Hey everyone, welcome to EverydayFI, the podcast that explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. I'm really excited about today's episode because I'm going to be chatting with Stacy, a former special education administrator, and we'll be talking about her journey to financial independence. Stacy shares her experiences of leaving her job to spend more time with her 18-month-old son and to pursue her personal interests such as financial coaching for families with children with disabilities. We also talk about her recent travels to France, her early money memories, and her decision to achieve ChooseFI rather than FullFI. Stacy also emphasizes the importance of community and flexibility on the FI journey and offers insights on the benefits of a 457 plan for educators. Tune in to hear us reflect on the value of designing a life that aligns with one's values right after we hear from our sponsors. Hey everyone, thank you for listening. I'm so happy you're here. I am chatting with Stacy today. I'm really excited to hear her story. We're going to talk about her FI journey and her early money memories and all kinds of stuff. So, hey Stacy, how are you doing? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, Megan. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so I live in Hampton Roads area and I have moved around quite a bit and I'm with my husband and my young son who's now 18 months. It's hard to believe. He's a year and a half. And recently I left my position as a special education administrator because I was ChooseFI. So I am really right now exploring some different things that I'm really interested in. I just got back from some trips. I went to France for the first time and just am really enjoying the balance that I have now with my son as well as pursuing some of my interests.
Wow, that's incredible. How did you like France? Where did you go?
Yeah, we actually went to Paris for a few days. We were celebrating my birthday. It was a big one. And then after we went to Paris, and of course we saw the Louvre and we went up to Brittany, which is actually the western part of France. And we explored St. Malo and Carnac and the Enchanted Forest. So we were there for about 10 days, and it was really wonderful to just kind of have a break and just do something different that if I had my W 2 job, it probably would have been pretty difficult for me to leave in early October working for the school district.
Yeah, for sure. People who work in schools definitely are beholden to the school schedule, and then you have to go on the vacation days that everybody else is going on. So it's kind of a bummer. So it's nice that you were able to break away from that. I myself went to France last October, and it's one of the best seasons to go to France, in my opinion, because the leaves are changing. The weather is really nice. Like it's still cool, but not too cold. And it's so beautiful. I'm very jealous of you. I've gone to Paris 3 times and I would live there if I could. That's amazing. So, what made you decide that you wanted to quit your job and now that you're ChooseFI? And just to define that for people who might not know, ChooseFI means that you have enough in your retirement accounts that you no longer have to add a dollar. You will be set for regular retirement at 65. And usually people have a lifestyle that's pretty low cost. And so they can work a job that's like part time, or if they have a spouse who works, they can just have one person working and the other person maybe stay home with a kid, or they work at a lower paying full time job, but something that's more passion related, but low paying. So, what's your story there, Stacy, when it comes to ChooseFI? Are you looking for work? Are you staying home?
Yeah, so actually, I had reached ChooseFI a little bit earlier, but during my maternity leave, it was really hard for me to think about going back, as I know that many mothers kind of struggle with. And then when I did go back, the way my job was is I would come home and it would be 5:30 and he would go to sleep at 7:30. So between dinner and we really only have maybe an hour and a half to kind of play. And even with that, sometimes I didn't want to necessarily be on the floor playing with him, doing all the things that I know I should be doing as a parent, just because I was so exhausted from what happened earlier in the day. So I was really kind of thinking about it that whole year that I went back. And my husband, he was really supportive. And he said, if you were able to do this and I don't want you to be stressed, and we have this opportunity. And so I went ahead and I took the opportunity to do so. One of the great things about working in education is that I had the opportunity to contribute to a 457 account in addition to a 403B account. And the cool thing about a 457 account is that you're able to access the money before retirement age if you separate from employment without that penalty. Thus far, I haven't had to access that money. So it's still being used as a retirement account, but it's kind of my cushion. So if there comes a time when I feel like I need to withdraw a little bit, I can. I'm taxed at my normal rate as if I had an income or another job. But right now, if you don't take money out, then it's still able to grow. So that's one thing that was really helpful for me when I was trying to make my decisions about would it be a good time or not to leave. I also kind of surrounded myself with other people that had done it, kind of combat that one more year syndrome, because that was something that I definitely could have stayed one more year, but then who's to say I wasn't going to stay another year? And really, for me, my son is only this young once, and I really am lucky to have this opportunity. And it's because of some of the financial decisions I made previously. So I decided to kind of take that leap, and I'm so glad that I did. I also follow Jillian Johnsrud about having those mini retirements and kind of structuring those into kind of different buckets or different seasons. So, kind of my initial one is that I really spent time with my family, and that was great that I had the ability to do that. And then I was able to travel some. And then, kind of, my next little shift is to work on my own business and to try to get that off the ground, something that I really wouldn't be able to do if I was still working my W-2 job.
Yeah, that 457 plan is a godsend. I've definitely learned a little bit more about that, even though I personally don't have one. Well before COVID, tangent, y'all, I hosted at our local library a tax info section for people in the community who are in the Raleigh-Durham area. And I had one of the tax professionals who's in this community who lives in the area kind of present on the different retirement accounts and the tax advantages. And that's where I first heard about 457s and the fact that you can take the money out and use it after you separate from service, even though it's a retirement plan. I was like, what? How do I get me one of these? And they were like, well, you got to be like a teacher or a government worker. I was like, okay, well, never mind. So yeah, if you have access to one of these, it's a super awesome account. It's almost up there with those HSAs. Like, definitely be contributing to those. So thank you for explaining what that was, Stacy. That's very helpful. And I'm very curious about what kind of business you want to run and start.
Yeah, so I had kind of been running it on the side, but now I am really focusing on financial coaching, specifically working with parents that have a child with a disability or a family member that they're providing support for. So one of the other things is with education right now, it's a structure, right? There's a lot of hierarchy and there's things that you really don't have full control over. But I've always really liked working with families and helping individual children. So this still allows me to give back and share some of my knowledge, and then combines my financial understandings and strategies as well as some of the resources and things that children may need that parents might not know about, or they know about it, but they don't know how to get those resources. And they're just so overwhelmed with everything that's going on in their life. So my goal is to really help them kind of get clear about the different steps that they need to take to make their life easier so they can really focus on their child as well as live the life that they want.
That is a very incredible business to run because I know that is something that is missing out there. And when I listen to some of the podcasts about setting up things like trusts and things like that for families who have kids with special needs, I hear an episode every once in a while. And I know there are people out there who have kids who have special needs who need these kind of resources. And I wouldn't even know where to go because I wouldn't even know where to point them to. And now I know I can point them to you. So that's great. What's the name of your business so that people know where to find you?
Sure. The name of my business is Rewire Behavior Financial Coaching.
What was the inspiration for that name for your business?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So often we do things out of habit, and those habits then kind of become ingrained. And we do that with our everyday life as well as with our money. So when we really look at our spending patterns, sometimes it's easy to fall into that habit, maybe going out or getting Instacart or doing kind of some of those other things that maybe don't truly align to our values. So one of the things that I work with is helping families make sure that their spending does align to their values and being really intentional about their time and their money because it is such valuable resources for them. And then another thing I wanted to touch on too, Megan, that you mentioned is a special needs trust. A special needs trust is a great vehicle for kind of those larger assets if a child is going to maybe inherit them. But as a financial coach, one of the things that I can do is help families figure out where can I find this $400 maybe a month that I want to save for my child with a disability. Because oftentimes, with all the different appointments, it's hard for them to kind of see that. So I kind of help even before some of those things come into place so that they're in a great financial position.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious, do you have advice that is considered typical financial advice that you would change for couples that have kids with special needs?
That's a great question. So there are similarities and then there are some differences. So one thing to keep in mind, there's a range of disabilities, right? So there's some that are more mild and maybe we expect that child to live independently. And then on the other end, there might be a family that has a child with very complex medical needs and they're not expected to live independently. So, kind of looking at not only the parents' spending and how much we expect different things to cost for them, but then also looking at the child's lifetime and what kind of expenses are we expecting for them? Are there other resources that can help pay for those expenses? Are we hooked up to those resources? So those are kind of some of the different nuance pieces that I help with. The other thing is that it costs more to raise a child with a disability than a child without. There was a study done a while ago, so like with inflation it's a little bit off, but it's about 26% more to raise a child with a disability versus a child without. And we all know with inflation and everything, even just raising a child's pretty expensive now. So parents really need to be even more intentional about their spending and really clear kind of about their goals and what they need to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. Are there any resources that you would recommend people can go to if they want to learn more about this?
Well, one of the things that not all family members know about is an ABLE account, which is an account that allows you to save. It's under kind of the 529 tax code, and it's really helpful because children are allowed to have this money and it doesn't impact some of the other eligibility benefits that they might be able to get, entitlements like supplemental security income or social security disability. So if the child has a disability before age 26, they're eligible for this account. So that is one thing that I think everybody should be aware of, and not everybody is.
Yeah, that's a great resource. I got caught up with the before 26, you're able to have this account. It made me wonder if you're an adult with a disability, do you have access to different accounts? Like after 26, what kind of accounts can you have? Or is it just regular accounts that any adult would have?
Yeah, so I need to look up the exact wordage, but they are changing the age to 46. I'm not exactly sure when that goes into effect, but that I think will make a huge difference in a lot of lives. Because if we also think about potentially our military that might have a disability that occurred when they were serving our country, they could maybe access ABLE accounts when previously they wouldn't be able to. So I can get you that citation for sure.
Yeah, that would be great. And I can link it to the show notes. Yeah, because Yeah, I was thinking exactly that. People in the military or people who might have an accident and now are on disability, or even, I'm even just thinking of, there's so many adults now who are finding out that they are autistic or have ADHD or things like that, that they're like, oh, this is why my life has been a little bit more challenging. And just wondering if these accounts are available to folks like that. I'm going to link to information on the ABLE account. Thanks for sharing this, and thanks for doing this. This is a great resource for people. I can't wait for folks to reach out to you if they need help. So we're talking about children, and we're talking about, you have a child who's 18 months old. We're talking about families who have special needs kids and growing up. And I like to talk about my guests' earliest money memories on the show. And what strikes me before we get to that topic is, you were in special education and you're now helping families with children who have special needs or disabilities. What drew you to wanting to work with children with special needs?
Well, I think, children with special needs, they're unique. Like each one has a specific story and they have specific needs and specific like interventions and services that you can do to help them increase whatever kind of goals that you set for them. So that was one thing early in my teaching career that I really enjoyed. Instead of just looking at, oh, third grade class is expected to do X, I could look at the individual child and all the complexities of the child. And I had a little bit more flexibility too with the way that I instructed. And so for me, that was more fun and I could interact with them in a deeper way. And then also, when you see the great growth that can happen within even a short year, it's really rewarding and really interesting and fun. So that's kind of part of the reason why I kind of navigated towards that or kind of shifted towards that pretty early in my career, is that I could look at each individual child and each specific case and really what their needs were. And then I could tailor what I was doing to support what they needed.
Yeah, that does sound very rewarding, actually. I have a couple of people in my life who are educators, and one thing that they talk about is having a larger classroom and not being able to have that one on one connection with the students as much, especially as the classrooms get larger. So it does sound like this is a path for potential educators out there who may not know that this is open to them, or this is how you can get that one on one connection with these children and really notice a difference in them. And yeah, I love that. What drew you to education to begin with? Was that your first major? Did you have any influences in your life that led you to that path?
Well, my dad was a teacher, but I didn't expect to be a teacher. I did my undergraduate in biology and psychology. And then I realized that if I wanted to do neuroscience, which was my original idea, I was going to have to always be by a big institution. And I didn't want to do that. So actually, one of my first jobs, I was a group life counselor at a residential treatment facility. And that was a really great job. Out of college, I was able to kind of do fun things with the kids, do crafts, play games, do sports, things like that. But it wasn't really fulfilling intellectually. And they had an opening at the school that was available in science. So I kind of went ahead and took that on. And I really ended up liking it. And yes, I like the science part, but even more so, even though not all the students had disabilities that were in this residential treatment facilities, a lot of them had some emotional issues, or they were they might have had some chemical dependency things going on, or maybe their background, didn't have all the supports when they were younger. So that kind of caused some different gaps. So it was kind of a wide range. So even if they didn't have an actual disability, a lot of them were behind in their education. So I really like that I was able to help support them as well as make science fun for them. Again, it was kind of a private school because it was residential. So I did have a little bit more flexibility. But after I did that for a few years, I went back and got my master's and got my certificate in special education and then moved into the public school system.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. It just goes to show you that the kind of experiences that you have and that you put yourself in front of can really shape your life and your destiny. So I really love that. Something that stuck out to me when you were speaking was you said, my dad was a teacher, but I never really planned on being a teacher. Why did you say it that way? Because a lot of the time, people, what their parents did really does influence what they wanted to do as adults. Like, for instance, my mother is a CFO and my dad was a lawyer and a nurse. And so my inclination was towards finance because there was a lot of that in what they did and also helping people. And so I'm curious, what about your dad being a teacher? Why don't you think that was an influence on you being a teacher?
I think it's something that I didn't really see myself doing. My dad, for most of his career, was kind of a non-traditional teacher. So he taught in like the jails, and then he moved into the public school system for his last few years. But I think during high school and even in college, like I had the opportunity to take education classes, but I wasn't really interested in those. I was more interested in the psychology and the biology part. So that's kind of where I focused. It just wasn't until I actually got in front of children and I could see how everything could kind of marry together and that I could use some of my learning theories as well as understanding behavior and what works for kids, that it kind of married it together to kind of help my pedagogy as a teacher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Thank you for sharing that. And we touched a little bit on your background with what your dad did and what your experience was in high school. So I'd like to touch on your money story a little bit. So, what is one of your earliest money memories that you can remember?
Yeah, so I have a few kind of sticking sort of with my dad. One of the things that we would do was that most Saturdays, especially in the spring and summer, we would go and actually work at the flea market. So he would buy different things and we would go and set up kind of shop to do yard sales sort of every weekend. That was kind of the first time that I felt like, oh, do this and I get paid. And flea markets and yard sales are all in cash back in those days. And I'd work the whole day for him and then I'd get a little bit of cash at the end. And I was like, oh, this is kind of good. I earned some money. So that was probably one of my earliest memories as far as earning money. Another memory that I have was we would have this large piggy bank and we would put money or kind of it's more often just like change that we got into this piggy bank and this was pretty big. It was probably almost like a 2-foot piggy bank, so I don't know where he got it, but in retrospect it was pretty large. And so throughout the year we would put like our change, just loose change, whatever we had in there, and then we would get together one day and dump it all out and actually roll all the coins and putting them together. I don't know yearly how much money that was, but just going through that process, and that was kind of my first exposure to really like saving. So all this little change that we put in this piggy bank actually now can help us with our vacation. So that was also a kind of a core memory that I have.
It's so funny you say that because I'm just reminded of the Carl and Carla episode that came out recently in October. And I think Carla mentioned that she did that. She would roll change and things like that. And I mentioned, did you guys have that big jug next to the door that you would put change in? And then at the end of the year or whenever it got full, you would dump it out and roll it and take it to the bank. And that was like your whatever fund, your bike fund, your car fund, even if you got it to high school. Like that's one of my more cherished memories as well. Tell me you're an elder millennial without telling me you're an elder millennial. So, yeah, I love that. And I guess so when you say working at a flea market, did you guys sell things or did you work for the people who sold things at the flea market? Like, how did that work? And how did you all get into that?
That's a funny kind of thing. But yeah, my dad, he just likes to kind of buy a lot of stuff, whether they were like storage units or other yard sales. He just kind of accumulated. So we would actually have a little booth that we would sell different things at most weekends at the flea market.
That's so cool. Did he try to flip things or was it like that kind of thing?
Yeah, in theory, he tried to flip things. Again, I'm not sure how profitable it really was, but it was a really good kind of bonding, and we were there, and it did kind of show me kind of that transactional, okay, you want to buy this, or other people wants to buy this, and I have to count out money for them and the different costs of different things and the different values.
Yeah, it's a great early money memory to have because it gets you involved in money early on and really in that handling and that transaction of it. I remember either going to or having garage sales. My family moved around a lot, and so we would always get rid of our junk and sell it on the lawn. And I always loved being the one who collected the money and took the money in, did the math, and made sure everybody got the change. Now, of course, we priced everything at 10 cents, 25 cents, so it wasn't too hard to make change or anything, but it was one of those early times when I had money in my hands and was actually needing to use it. Or I remember having a lemonade stand too. I don't know. Probably everybody had a lemonade stand who's our age, but that watered down lemonade that people just bought for 50 cents or whatever. So it brings me back to we've talked a lot about your dad, so we haven't talked about your mom much. So how did your parents talk about money, or do you remember them talking about money in front of you or any of those kinds of conversations at all?
Yeah. So my parents divorced when I was about 13. So I kind of had two different really kind of philosophies like with money. My dad, he kind of exposed us much more to kind of hands-on things with money. My mom's side, not so much. Not that we didn't like talk about it, but I just don't really remember those like specific kind of learning opportunities. I do remember when I was in high school, my grandfather, he did some investments and trading. He kind of sat me down and kind of showed me about investments. And I thought that was pretty cool. Just the fact that you could own a stock and that you would have part of that company and then it could grow over time. But yeah, my mom didn't really talk about it as much. I don't know if that was just the different dynamic kind of from her generation too, that stereotypically, but men tend to talk more about finances than women do. But even now, obviously, we're both older and she still doesn't really kind of talk about money the way that my dad does. So I don't know. It could be kind of her upbringing as well.
Yeah, for sure. And do you remember when they were married, if they talked about money together at all?
If they did, I think it was kind of around the vacations and us going to different places. We would try to go, whether it was the beach or somewhere every year. So I kind of remember hearing it maybe around that, but not kind of the day to day money discussions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, as a kid, you're not really focused on money conversations as much, right? It's more of a sense of, is there any sort of tension in the household, or was everything pretty relaxed and you usually got enough presents or whatever, like you didn't feel lacking in any sort of way? Like those are the kinds of interesting nuances that I think kids feel over like actual verbal conversations. So was there anything like that? Did you have a sense of where your parents were monetarily speaking when you were growing up? Did you have a sense of whether or not you all were rich or poor or middle class or anything like that?
Yeah, I think we were solidly middle class. We were able to do kind of fun things. We were able to get tickets to King's Dominion when we lived in the Richmond area. We were able to go on vacations. We owned our house. So, yeah, and both my parents worked throughout my childhood. So I would say that we were solidly in the middle class range, but most of my friends were middle class as well. So I just wasn't really exposed to those that maybe I would consider wealthier or those that had more limited means.
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of that insulation effect. I think I had something similar growing up as well, where we all lived in the same neighborhood and had the cookie cutter houses. So we all had similar, not roles to play, but just like the different parents had the similar types of jobs and roles that they had in their lives. So yeah, I completely see that. And before we move on from this topic, what did your mom do?
So my mom has always been in the medical field. Originally, she was a phlebotomist, and then she worked on the bench, actually doing kind of different tests that the doctors would call in at She worked at a hospital, so doctors would call in, say they want a specific test, and then she would run that. And then later she became a supervisor in that same area.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, teacher for your dad, medical field for your mom. So, that's pretty cool. And I'm wondering if your parents taught you any sort of tactical lessons when it came to money. Did they tell you about budgeting or saving or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was specific. I remember there was different times that we would go out and they would say, you have $10. And so once you spend the $10, you don't have any more. So spend it, well. So I do remember kind of that, but that was more just isolated incidents and not specific, like a longer term budget or other expenses or things like that.
Yeah, that's good to know. So, because that kind of leads me to my final question about your money story. How did your upbringing, in your eyes, shape your financial philosophies as an adult?
Well, I think pretty early I realized that money was a tool that kind of made things easier. And if you had your own money, then you didn't have to ask for permission to do different things. So I think that was sort of one thing. And then just growing up, like I was always kind of a saver. I rarely spent my money, and I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but I think it had to do with just kind of being raised to kind of be mindful of costs and to kind of be frugal. So I've always kind of saved more than spent.
Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, you're lucky. I grew up with a single mom who had expensive taste, and I kind of inherited that from her. So, yeah, I wish I was frugal. I have to really rein it back when trying to not spend money. It's like going on a diet for me, unfortunately. So, that actually makes me wonder, like, when it comes to financial independence in the fire community, what led you to this community specifically out of all of the different types of personal finance that's out there? Why were you drawn to this specific type of movement, do you think?
Well, I kind of was doing some of the principles before I even kind of read about them. And then when I read about them, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And that's what I'm doing. And this is why. So for me, part of FI is really having the options to do different things with your money and to not be tied down to a specific, you must do different things. So kind of through even when I was younger and now as I've evolved and I'm able to kind of take advantage of opportunities because of some of the things that I've done financially that I wouldn't be able to if I hadn't.
Yeah, like what?
Well, I think it's like the travel piece and staying home to be with my son and even just kind of the shift. So I would say that I've kind of evolved a bit compared to my 20s to where I am now. In my 20s, it was really, I'm going to save like every single penny. I lived in Alaska for a little while. When I lived in Alaska and I was coming to the East Coast, those flights, I would do whatever I could to keep those costs down, even if it meant that I had a 20-hour layover somewhere. I would pick that flight over the most direct. Now, to me, it's my time is just as valuable. So I wouldn't do that now and I'd spend a little bit more money. So I think one of the good things about FI is that it is kind of dependent on where you are and there's room for everybody depending on sort of where you're at and what your final goals are. Because even though I'm ChooseFI, there might be an opportunity where I decide to go back to a W-2 job. I don't foresee that right now, but it's always on the table. So for me, having more options is always better than having less. And I think when you're able to really have a good handle on your money, then you're able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said. It's funny because what you said reminded me of something Brad Barrett says on his podcast, ChooseFI, where the worst thing that can happen to people who decide to retire early or quit their jobs early is that they just have to go back to work. Like if
Right.
it doesn't work out, you just get a job again. And of course, the just get a job again after a long break, of course, is probably maybe a little challenging, but still, that's the worst that can happen. Not so bad. So, yeah, I love that. And I want to dig in more on this topic. So, how old were you when you found the FIRE or FI movement, and which person in the community drew you in? And by person, I mean, was it the ChooseFI podcast? Was it Paula Pants Afford Anything? Was it Mr. Money Mustache? Was it somebody else, or was it a friend? I'd love to hear more about that discovery story.
Sure. So probably my first kind of introduction or part of my wealth building was through real estate and bigger pockets. So it kind of started there, kind of being intentional in, oh, well, if you have additional money saved, buy a rental property, and then that can help you do different things. I actually had the opportunity to meet Brad and Jonathan pretty early on when they were starting the podcast, and I was in Richmond. So that was great. And when I heard them, everything that they were saying were things that I had kind of already integrated, which was awesome. One of the other podcasts, like you said, is Afford Anything with Paula Pant. I've probably been listening to her for over 10 years. One of the things I really appreciate about her is the different guests that she brings on, not just from the financial sector, but she brings in like psychologists, and she'll bring in medical people to kind of talk about the different aspects that could impact your money, and then also to help you kind of think about it in a different way. So I really appreciate those kind of podcasts. And I probably would say that it would be, if I had to pick one person, I would say that it would be Paula.
Yeah, I love Paula Pant, and I love, I think she describes what she's trying to do is elevating the conversation or elevating the money conversation, because you're right. Money, as you said earlier, is a tool, and it touches every single aspect of your life, and in so many different ways. It's one of the reasons why I like Paula Pant, and also Money with Katie. She does something similar. And actually, Paula had Katie on her show recently, and I was like, ooh, this is the collab I never knew I needed. Because on the show Money with Katie, she does something very similar where she brings money topics into the conversation about social impacts and like how money comes into play there, which I really like, especially as a woman. And yeah, I love Paula Pant. I could gush about her all day. And you guys should listen to her and Money with Katie. And I'm going to link those in the show notes so that you do. So yeah, thank you for describing that journey some more. And my last question for that one is, was your husband on board? Did you have to kind of convince him to come along? Did he already know about the FI movement? Did you find it and say, look at my spreadsheet? How did that conversation go?
Well, that's kind of interesting. So my current husband is actually my second marriage. So I went through a practice marriage. And so kind of going through that, even kind of more reiterated the importance of having my own money. And so now I guess my husband, we kind of have different philosophies. He is retired Navy who works for the government. So he has kind of sort of a different setup because he has a pension and he's working on getting another pension through the government. And that's kind of what he's choosing to do. And so for him, when I brought it up, again, it was something where he just really felt, well, yeah, that makes sense. But I guess it wasn't really novel to him, but he didn't put terminology with it, if that makes sense. But one thing that's a little unique about us is because it's the second marriage for both of us, we actually keep our finances separate. And that works well for us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And does he have any aims to stop working before the age of 65, or does he want to keep going?
Yeah, right now he wants to get 20 years with the government. So it will be before age 65, but not that much earlier, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So it's funny because sometimes when couples, one of them is not quite into the financial independence movement and the other one is, if one of them's like, get away from me, you freak with your spreadsheets. It's kind of how me and my partner are. I mean, he's totally down with the whole thing, but he's like, I don't want to look at your stupid spreadsheet anymore. But I like that your husband is kind of like, yeah, duh. I'm already doing this. This is a no brainer. Of course, to save this much. And of course, you want financial independence. Duh. So I love that. And also your comment about I had a practice marriage just took me out a little bit. I was laughing really hard. I was on mute, but I was laughing. That was pretty good.
Yeah. And I think that my first marriage, I got married when I was 21, and there was some things I didn't know about myself, and we learned, and financially too. I learned some different things financially that we went through, that sometimes experience is the best teacher, and you can read all sorts of stuff, but until you actually go through it, it doesn't really stick. But by going through it and coming out on the other side, and then still being able to build up and save and be in this opportunity now, I also think it shows that you don't have to do everything right financially, and it's okay if you've had hiccups and bumps. You can still reach that number or that goal that you would like, so that you do have those options.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm going to take that sound bite of it's okay to make mistakes and experience is the best teacher and tell myself that every day. Because I feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself to be perfect. And whenever I make a mistake with my money, I'm like, oh, better. But like you said, it's okay to make mistakes. We're all human. And that's also how we learn. We don't pop into existence knowing how to balance a checkbook or knowing how to use a credit card or knowing what compound interest is. It just doesn't, well, it doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And of course, our education system doesn't quite have the education needed to teach us how to do all of that. But 4 years of English class, we got that down. Anyway, I'm on one of my little rants here, but I really appreciate you saying that. And like I said, I needed to hear that myself. And I think there were probably other people listening who needed to hear that. So I think that might be the title. Experience is the best teacher. It reminds me, we were talking before we hit record about being older parents, and I'm 37 and my partner and I are trying for a child. And so I will technically be an older parent. My dad was an older parent. He had me at 40. And you and I, Stacy, were talking about how, well, the age of 20, you don't really know your bum from your elbow when you're 20. And so probably having kids as an older person is probably a little bit easier because you kind of have that experience. Like you said, you have lived a little bit and you're probably a little bit more emotionally mature. And so that's going to be easier probably to raise a child than if you're basically a child yourself at 20. At least I was. I'm not speaking for everybody, but definitely for me, I was a child at 20. I cannot imagine having a child at 20. So anyway, all that to say, I really appreciate experience is the best teacher. I love that.
Yeah. And sometimes you need to go through different things in order to learn.
Yeah. So good. Okay. So we talked a little bit about why you were drawn to the FI movement specifically. And we know that you are now quit your job. You're going to pursue your side business. But is there any more about your why of FI that you want to talk about? And like what reaching that financial independence number looks like for you? If you, I mean, I know you're ChooseFI, but are you targeting like full FI? And if so, why do you want to get there? And what does that look like? Like when you and your husband both stop working, what do your days look like?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. My husband, I think when I said I was leaving my W-2 job, he sort of just expected me to be at the house and not really do much. But for me, it's really the opportunity even now to pursue the things that I'm interested in and that I didn't have the mental capacity or the space to do previously, or even just kind of take the time. I'm not sure, and maybe it's still because I'm early in my journey, how different when I'm actually FI versus when I'm ChooseFI will be. Because right now I'm doing things that are interesting to me that I haven't been able to do. I'm able to volunteer like one day a week that I couldn't have done before. But at the same time, there was one day that my son was sick. And so I needed to stay home and be with him instead of volunteer. And so I was able to do that. We didn't have to kind of shuffle schedules around in order to make that happen. And then the other piece is the travel. I really was only in my house for about a week in October. The whole other time we went to France, we got to go to a conference in Atlanta. So we've just been doing different things, went up to New Jersey and New York. And I just wouldn't have been able to do that previously, or it would have been a lot harder to tell my boss, hey, I want this month off to go travel and explore different things. My husband has a pretty flexible job, so that is helpful. My job was not flexible. I wasn't able to work from home at all. If I'm an administrator, I need to be at school with the kids. So I think if I had maybe more flexibility in my previous role, it might have shifted things. But now I have that flexibility, so I can pursue the things that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of goes to show that you don't have to reach your FI number to live the life that you want to live today. It didn't stop you. You're not full FI yet, you're ChooseFI, and yet you're still living the exact life that you've designed for yourself. And that last statement that you were like, I didn't have the flexibility that I needed. And so you created the flexibility. And I love that because sometimes we make excuses for not living the life we want and blame it on things that are outside of us. But it's actually really empowering to realize how much control we actually do have over our lives and our choices and the kind of changes we can make. So, for example, when you talked about having flexibility and you had to be in an office because of the kind of job that you had, it reminded me of I work from home specifically because I work in software. It's very easy, but my partner is a lab scientist. So he has to work in a lab for his job. And so I just figured that he would never be able to work from home. And whenever we decide to actually have a child, I'm home, which is great, but we would probably have to hire help because I can't take care of the child while I'm actually working. But he just interviewed for a job that has a remote aspect to it because it's a different kind of lab job where he goes and he consults for 1 or 2 days a week and then works from home the rest of the time. And I was like, oh, okay. So a job that you traditionally thought might be only ever in person, it's not necessarily. And oh, we just had to look outside the box a little bit for different kinds of opportunities. So I'm just saying this so that people listening might think, oh, I'm in a job that doesn't allow me to do this, that, or the other thing. There might be other types of jobs or ways that your job is configured that you can find that fits your life a little bit better. And yeah, this is your sign to go out there and look for that because you can live the life that you want right now without having to wait to reach financial independence. And I will get off my soapbox.
No, yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And there's a lot of different options and maybe even adjacent careers that when you have a little bit of savings, you are more comfortable then potentially making that jump or maybe accepting a job that pays a little less than what you had previously. If I could have found the job that I had and it would have been part remote, I might have stayed at it a few more years, but that really wasn't an option for me. And just given everything, this was kind of the best choice for me at this time. And it does feel really great to know that you put yourself in a position where you can kind of take those opportunities. The other piece is last year, some of my friends had some different medical things kind of go on with cancer and things like that. And you just don't know. And I know that people say that all the time, but as you said, it's really important to kind of design the life that you want now and to really not wait.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sorry to hear about that with your friends. You're right. I mean, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but we're a generation where colon cancer rates are skyrocketing among people in their 30s. And who knows why, but it could be stress, it could be what we're eating, whatever, but it's happening. And when I say skyrocketing, I don't want to scare anybody. It's not like out of this world, but it could happen. And it's things that just take you by surprise because you're so young. And so you don't want something like that, or even there are a bunch of idiots driving on the road right now. What if one of those hits your car and you get really badly injured? Like, you don't want to let that be the thing that jumpstarts you into the life you want, because by then it might either be too late or be a lot harder. And so this is just, again, me saying, if anything if you're having limiting beliefs about, I can't do X, Y, and Z because of A, B, and C, then maybe look at that a little bit deeper and see if there really is other ways that you could approach the way you want to live your life. And I wish I could give you examples, but I can only give you ones from my own life. And back to what I was saying about my partner, we decided that if he doesn't get this remote-esque job, he's going to potentially work full-time at a boulder gym, that a local one that's opening up here down the street, because he absolutely loves climbing. It's one of his passions. The hours, even though it's full-time, it's not 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, it's a bouldering gym, so it's open way more hours than that, so he can have a much more flexible schedule that could work with our schedule. And it's way less money, but we're in a financial position that we can do that. We are actually technically ChooseFI as well. ChooseFI, and the fact that I could stop contributing to my retirements and we would be fine, and him as well. We are not to the point where our expenses are so low that we could both take lower paying jobs. Like, I would still have to have the higher paying job, but he can. And I would want that for him. And so it's one of those things that we're weighing the cost benefits of this and really designing our life by what we really want out of it right now and what the choices we're making right now are going to mean. But anyway, I again am talking a lot, so sorry. You're very inspirational, Stacy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about how you got into FI through bigger pockets and real estate investing. So it makes me curious, what's your target strategy for reaching financial independence? Do you have real estate investments now? Are you mostly in the stock market? Is there anything else that you're doing to reach financial independence?
Yeah, so I do have one rental property that I used to live in that I have turned into a rental. But most of my money is actually in the stock market, in VTSAX, pretty much like 95% there. I know that there's been some discussion about, is that the best route or not, or should you have 4 funds and all of that. I'm not an investment professional by any means, but for me, that's worked well, and that's been simple, and really keeping those costs down and having things with Vanguard has worked out.
Yeah, for sure. And I know exactly what you're talking about. On 2 episodes of Paula Pant's Afford Anything, where she has the co-host ChooseFI on to answer questions, they talked about the efficient frontier. And I'll link what that is in the show notes. I don't quite know the particulars, so don't quote me on this, but it's basically, instead of doing one total stock market fund or one S&P 500 fund, you diversify a little bit more so that you get a more efficient return for the risk tolerance that you're taking. I personally, Joe Saul-Sehy was like, oh, it'll take you 40 minutes a year to do this. But I was like, well, I have accounts across a lot of different brokerages. And that's just because my HSA is at Fidelity, because Vanguard doesn't have an HSA. And I have a simple IRA at Fidelity as well, because I can't transfer it yet to Vanguard. And then my workplace has their own thing. They have Empower, and then some HSA of theirs as well. And so I have all these different kinds of accounts just because I have to. And I don't want to have to go in and rebalance all of those based on this formula. Like, I like the simple path to wealth that JL Collins talks about. That's my favorite thing, because I want to set it and forget it. And even if the efficient frontier got me like 0.5% more, I think I'd still do the simple path, because I have a tendency to, if I have to go and mess around with my investments, I'll mess something up, because human psychology. I'll be like, you know what? I tried this fund. Why don't I do this one and see what happens? I might mess around so much that I mess around and find out bad things. And so I just want it to be set it and forget it, so that I don't mess it up with my human brain doing human brain things. So I'm with you. And I'll link those episodes in the show notes if I can find them again. All right, so we're coming towards the end of our time, but before we go, I want to discuss some current wins and current struggles you're going through right now.
So right now, one of the things that I am working through is I now have this bucket of time that I can do kind of limitless sort of things with. And I have a bunch of different ideas, but really how to structure that time. I'm used to going from school to school or meeting to meeting. The fact that I need to structure my time and nobody's looking over my shoulder with, hey, did you complete this? Or what's going on here? So I'm still kind of working through that. As I mentioned before, kind of thinking about it in terms of seasons and main focuses has helped some. For instance, in September, I wasn't really that focused on working on building my business because at that point, it was more spending time with my family. And that was the number one priority. October has been kind of a mix of business and travel. And then in November and December are kind of short months, but I'm really using those to hone in on some of the aspects of my business and to help that move smoother and in a positive direction. So I think that's one thing that I didn't quite expect because I've always managed my time pretty well. But when you have so many different things that you could do in all those different areas, trying to figure out what to do first is still something that I'm working through for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot easier when you have somebody telling you what the priorities are
Yeah.
than having to create them for yourself. Yeah, I completely get that. I myself like a little bit more structure.
I think it's something too that as I've gone on, like it does get a little easier. But those first times it's, oh, okay, I can do this and I can do this and all of this sounds good. And you do those things and they bring you different experiences and you have those opportunities. But then, okay, what's sustainable in the long term? And could I get myself like on a particular schedule? So that's sort of what I'm working on now. I try to, on Thursdays, I volunteer. And then on some other times, I kind of block off for maybe doing some business activities. And then in the evenings now, even before the evenings, really, typically like 3 o'clock on is family time. So kind of just having those sort of blocks has helped, but it's certainly a process to try to figure out those pieces.
Yeah, it's amazing when you go from working a full-time job to not almost immediately, and how much you relied on that job to give you structure in your life because you had to plan everything around the job. I'm just thinking about if you have a 9 to 5, like that means that you either have to go to the gym in the early morning or at night. You can't go in the middle of the day. I mean, some people might be able to, but it's kind of hard if you have to drive to the gym and like it takes 20 minutes and then you do your class and it's 45 minutes and you have to drive back and then your boss is like, where the hell are you? Does that sound like I've done that before? Maybe. And yeah. And then you are doing most of your socializing on the weekends when you have no work. But when you open that all up and now you can do it anytime, it's like freeing, but also the strings have been cut. So you're a little bit free falling as well. And I say this because my mom kind of went through that a little bit when she retired recently from her job. She's 66, so she retired at like kind of the normal age. And she's like, I wake up at 10, I putter around the house, and all of a sudden it's the afternoon, and I have no idea where all that time went. And she's better now. It's been about 6 months, but in the first few months, I was just completely sleeping all the time and totally unstructured, and it was crazy. So it is interesting how that goes. But yeah.
I have found one strategy. There's an application that's called Toggl Track, and I just use the free version, but you can actually kind of denote like your time blocks and what you're spending on them. So that's helped some when I'm like, what did I do? Because when you're ChooseFI or when you don't have that W-2 job, sometimes it's easy to say or think I didn't accomplish anything, but really you did. You just did different things that maybe don't have a specific product. And in our society, we're so used to working for a specific product all the time. So that's kind of helped me some as I'm on this journey.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I'll link that in the show notes. And you're so right. In this society, we think about our productivity as being the most important part of ourselves, and that's really not true. Even if our time was spent resting, that is valuable. Like we need rest, and it's allowing you to have the energy to do other things as well. You don't have to have a product out of your productivity. Your productivity could be, I'm going to rest today. because that's good for me and that's good for my health. And that means that I will be well rested for whatever's coming up in the next few days or whatever. You don't even have to rest for something else. You just rest for yourself, just to rest, just for the sake of resting. So yeah, I love that. So let's end on a high note. What are some of your current wins right now?
So I think one of my current wins, and it's going to sound a little funny, but is really that I'm able to be more present as a mom. Even though I don't stay home with my son, when I'm with him, I'm really with him and we're engaged and we're able to do those things that I wanted to do before that honestly I was just too exhausted to do. So that's something that has been a really powerful win and kind of reaffirms, even if the business doesn't work out and even if these other pieces don't, like doing that for him and being present and having the opportunity to do that is really special.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where I mentioned something along these lines in like a way early podcast, but my therapist and I were talking a little bit about children and raising children and having the bandwidth to allow children to kind of teach themselves how to do things. She was like, and this was in context of something completely different, but she was like, a lot of times as parents, we're go, 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 and we need things to be fast. And the problem is kids don't learn that way, especially if you do it for them. So, for example, when a kid's learning to tie their shoes, it's faster for the parent just to tie it for them, especially if they're late to school or late to work or late to whatever. Whereas if you let the child learn to tie their shoe, or maybe let them learn how to get water for themselves, even if it takes them 20 minutes, that's so helpful for them because they will not, first of all, they won't expect somebody to do things for them all the time, which was kind of the context of this conversation. We were talking about how she regretted raising her son in a certain way where he expects like women in his life to do dishes for him because she always did them. But she was like, when you allow your kids to do it for themselves, it teaches them this kind of independence, but also that you are there to support them if, say, they make a mistake, like if they drop the water in the kitchen, like you're there to say, no, this is okay. This is just a mistake. Here's how we can correct this. And you can get the water next time or whatever. And you can't do that when you're working full time. Like you said, even if you have the time, the mental and physical and emotional bandwidth might not be there because, like you said, you're exhausted. So, yeah, I love that. That's actually something that I've been thinking for myself. Like when we have kids, I've said to myself that I want to stay in my current job for the next 5 years, but I'm like, is that going to be true once I have a kid and I am on maternity leave and I see how wonderful that's probably going to be? Am I really going to want to go back to work? I think it's going to be really hard. And so I'm kind of preparing for that potential hiccup that I might not return back to a high paying full time job and I might have to go to something that's part time because I don't want to have to limit myself and have to go back to work because I have to support this lavish lifestyle that I created for myself. So I love that you said that because it's super powerful and something that I think a lot of people are probably thinking about. And I love that you get that pants with your son as well.
Yeah. And for him being 18 months, I can relate to kind of what you were saying. So he likes to climb upstairs. So he's kind of at that age where he's able to climb up the stairs, but it takes a good 15 minutes for him to climb up the stairs. But I'm able to let him kind of do that, support him right there in case he slips or anything like that. But and without feeling that urgency or that being rushed. So it's something that's been really great. And even just in this short time, seeing how he grows. And, people tell you that when you become a parent, things change, but you don't really realize how much it does and how your perspective really does shift. On a different note, another win I would say is that I recently got back from FinCon, which was in Atlanta. And that gave me the opportunity to meet with a lot of wonderful people in the financial fintech kind of area, some other podcasters and bloggers and some marketing people, and talk with them and network and just learn. And so that was really exciting to be able to go and to be able to really make some good connections moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I am having a little bit of FOMO because I had actually signed up for FinCon, but then decided to not go. I bought the ticket, but the hotel, I was going to stay at the hotel where they were hosting it, and it was just so expensive. And I had an expense with a house come up, and I just couldn't afford it anymore. And so I just ate the cost of the ticket. But Bill from Catching Up to Fi called me on his way there and was talking to me. And I was like, man, now I've got FOMO because I'm like completely missing out on meeting Bill and hanging out with him and hanging out with the Fi crew. And now I just realized that I missed out on meeting you in person, Stacy. So I'm definitely going to have to go next year. Yeah. So that's awesome.
Next year it's in Portland. So.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. See, that was the thing is I could drive to Atlanta. But Portland is a cool city, so that I might just go just for the fun of that and just make it a whole trip. That's awesome. Well, that sounds so great. So now we are coming to the end of our time, but before you leave, I'd really love you to leave our community with a life hack recommendation or learning that you can share with us.
So I don't know if it's necessarily a life hack, but I think it's really easy when you're on this journey, either towards FI, to kind of be victim of comparing yourself to others. We all have kind of different stories, and it really, I think, depends too where you start. I was lucky that I didn't start with a lot of student debt. Some people do, and that's something that they have to work through before they can even get to zero. So I think just comparing yourself to yourself and your next step is really important. The other piece that we hit on earlier too is a 457 plan. If you are in education or work for the state government, to really look into that. Sometimes it's a district plan and sometimes it's a state plan. And oftentimes it's not really advertised, like the difference between the 457 and the 403B. But if you're really looking at potentially exiting your job early, the 457, although the fees may be a little bit higher, it's a large part of the reason why I was able to leave my job. And then I guess other things is community, making sure that you have your community. If you have a partner that's on the same path as you and you guys are connected and both on that FI journey, that's awesome. But there's also so many other ways that you can connect, either through Facebook or in meetups or even like Camp FI and other podcasts, just to get other perspectives. You know, you wanting to do this, it's not crazy. It has been done and you can do it.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here and sharing your time with me and telling me your story and giving us your nuggets of wisdom. Before we leave, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to share?
If anybody has any questions about things or they want to reach out, they certainly can on my website, rewirebehavior.com.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'll definitely put that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi-podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.